The courtroom was buzzing with whispers as James Carter stood alone, facing a judge known for his harsh rulings. A smirk played on the judge's lips as he glanced at the young black man who dared to defend himself. Laughter echoed from the spectators. No lawyer, no chance. But James didn't flinch. He adjusted his tie, eyes sharp, ready to speak. The prosecutor sighed, already seeing an easy win. But then James opened his mouth, and within minutes the mood shifted. Smirks faded, eyes widened, and the judge leaned forward, no longer amused. No one was laughing now. Forever? Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today, and if you enjoy stories like this, don't forge to subscriber, so you never miss a new one. The courtroom was tense, filled with murmurs and skeptical glances. James Carter, a young black man in his late 20s, stood at the defendant's table, his posture calm, but his eyes sharp. Across from him, Judge Reynolds, a man known for his strict demeanor and, some whispered, his biases, leaned back in his chair, smirking. "So, Mr. Carter," the judge said, his voice laced with condescension, "you've decided to represent yourself?" James nodded. "That's correct, Your Honor." A chuckle rippled through the courtroom. Some of the spectators shook their heads, and even the prosecutor, a well-dressed man with silver hair, raised an eyebrow. It was rare for anyone to defend themselves, let alone someone like James, young, underestimated, and facing serious charges. Judge Reynolds exhaled sharply, clearly amused. "Well, this should be interesting," he muttered under his breath. But as the trial began, it didn't take long for the smirks to fade. James stepped forward confidently, his presence commanding attention. He adjusted his tie, then turned toward the jury, his voice steady and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I may not wear a fancy suit like my opponent, and I don't have a law degree hanging on my wall," he began, glancing at the prosecutor. "But what I do have is the truth and a deep understanding of my own case." The judge smirked again, leaning on one elbow. "Mr. Carter, let's not turn this into a speech contest. You may proceed with your defense." James nodded and picked up a stack of neatly organized papers. "Your Honor, I'd like to begin by questioning the evidence presented against me." The prosecutor sighed, looking almost bored. "Go ahead," he said, waving his hand dismissively. James walked toward the evidence table, lifting a document. "This police report claims I was seen fleeing the scene at exactly 9:15 p.m. However, I'd like to introduce Exhibit A, surveillance footage from a store 5 miles away, time-stamped 9:10 p.m. Tell me, Your Honor, how could I be in two places at once?" The courtroom went silent. Judge Reynolds's smirk disappeared. The prosecutor quickly flipped through his own files, his confident demeanor starting to crack. James pressed on. "Furthermore, the key witness, Mr. Daniels, claims he saw me under a streetlight. Yet, according to the city's maintenance records, that light has been broken for over 6 months. So I ask, what exactly did he see?" Murmurs spread across the courtroom. The judge shifted uncomfortably. James took a step closer to the jury, his voice calm but firm. "I may not be a lawyer, but I know when something doesn't add up, and right now the case against me is falling apart." The judge cleared his throat, his tone no longer amused. "Mr. Carter, continue." The prosecutor's face had lost its smugness. He shuffled through his papers, searching for something, anything, to counter James's argument. But James wasn't done yet. He turned toward the jury, his confidence growing. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about fairness. We live in a system where people like me are often assumed guilty before we even speak. But today I ask you to look at the facts, not the assumptions." He walked over to the prosecution's table and pointed at another document. "This is the officer's statement claiming I resisted arrest. But take a look at Exhibit B body cam footage from that same officer. Not only does it show me complying, but it also proves that I asked for a lawyer, a right that was ignored. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. He knew James was right. James took a deep breath and turned to Judge Reynolds. Your Honor, I move to have this case dismissed on the grounds of insufficient evidence, unreliable testimony, and a clear violation of my rights. A heavy silence filled the room. The judge, who had started the trial with laughter, now looked serious. He glanced at the prosecutor, who had no response. Finally, Judge Reynolds exhaled. Mr. Carter, I must admit you have presented a compelling argument. He adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable. I need to review this carefully before making my decision. James simply nodded, his face calm but determined. He had done his part. Now all he could do was wait. The courtroom was still. Every eye was on Judge Reynolds as he tapped his fingers on the bench, deep in thought. He had entered this trial expecting an easy case, another young black man defending himself, another conviction. But James Carter had turned the tables. The judge cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, I have to say, I did not expect this level of preparation from you. James met his gaze without hesitation. With all due respect, Your Honor, that's because you underestimated me. A few gasps echoed in the room. Even the bailiff's eyebrows shot up. But James wasn't being rude, he was simply stating the truth. Judge Reynolds hesitated for a moment, then let out a small chuckle. I suppose I did. His tone wasn't mocking this time, it was, impressed. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, Judge Reynolds held up a hand. Unless you have any new evidence to present, I believe we've seen enough. The prosecutor opened his mouth, then shut it. He had nothing. The judge sighed and straightened his robe. In light of the inconsistencies in the evidence, the unreliable testimony, and the violation of the defendant's rights, this court has no choice but to dismiss the case. Mr. Carter, you are free to go. The moment the words left his mouth, the courtroom erupted. Some people cheered, others whispered in shock. James, however, simply closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it all sink in. He had won. Judge Reynolds gave him a long look, before standing up. Mr. Carter, you have a sharp legal mind. Ever thought about law school? James smirked, adjusting his tie. I have now. With that, he turned and walked out of the courtroom, his head held high. And for the first time in a long time, Judge Reynolds wasn't laughing. The story has reached a natural and powerful conclusion, but if you'd like to continue, let me know what direction you have in mind. Do you want to explore what happens next in James Carter's life, maybe his journey to law school, or how this case impacts the legal system? Let me know and I'll keep writing. As James stepped out of the courthouse, the crisp afternoon air hit his face. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of months of stress finally lift off his shoulders. Reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in his direction. Mr. Carter, how does it feel to have won your case? One journalist called out. Do you plan to sue for wrongful arrest? Another asked. James held up a hand, signaling for quiet. I'm just grateful that the truth came out, he said simply. But this isn't just about me. There are thousands of people who don't get the chance to fight back. That needs to change. A murmur spread through the crowd. James had walked in as a defendant, but he was walking out as something else, an inspiration. As he pushed past the reporters, a familiar voice called out, James! He turned to see his mother, eyes filled with tears, standing at the bottom of the steps. Without hesitation, he rushed toward her, wrapping her in a tight hug. I knew you could do it, she whispered. He smiled. You always did. Just then, a man in a sleek navy suit approached. James Carter? James straightened. Yes. The man extended a business card. I'm David Langston, a professor at the local law school. I watched your case closely. You have a gift, Mr. Carter. If you're interested in studying law, I'd love to help you get started." James glanced at the card, then back at the professor. For the first time in a long time, he saw a new path in front of him, one where he wasn't just fighting for himself, but for others who needed a voice. He smirked. "Tell me more." A week had passed since James walked out of that courtroom, a free man. But freedom didn't mean rest. If anything, his mind was more restless than ever. He sat at his small kitchen table, the professor's business card in front of him. The words law school stared back at him like a challenge. Could he really do this? Could he go from being a defendant to a defender? His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. "James Carter, I saw what you did in court. We need to talk. Call me. Attorney Michael Grayson." James raised an eyebrow. Michael Grayson? The name sounded familiar. Then it clicked. He was one of the top defense attorneys in the state. James exhaled, staring at the message. First, a law professor, and now a renowned lawyer. He had gone from being laughed at in court to getting attention from some of the biggest names in the legal world. Maybe this wasn't just luck. Maybe this was a sign. He picked up his phone, his fingers hovering over the call button. Then, without overthinking, he pressed it. "Mr. Grayson?" The deep voice on the other end replied instantly. "James Carter. I've been waiting for your call." James leaned back in his chair, gripping the phone tightly. "You said you wanted to talk. I'm listening." Michael Grayson chuckled on the other end. "I've been practicing law for over 20 years, and I've seen a lot of talented lawyers in the making, but what you did in that courtroom, that was something special." James exhaled, unsure of what to say. Grayson continued, "I won't waste your time. I want you to come work with me, not as a lawyer yet, but as a legal apprentice. Learn the system from the inside, see how real cases are won and lost, and if you decide law school is for you, I'll help you get there." James was speechless. A week ago, he was fighting to prove his own innocence. Now, one of the most respected attorneys in the state was offering him a future he never imagined. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Why me?" "Because," Grayson said, "the best lawyers aren't just the ones who know the law. They're the ones who understand what it means to fight for justice." "And you? You've already proven you have that fight in you." James looked down at the professor's business card, then at the blank notebook on his table, the same one he had used to build his defense. For the first time in his life, the future didn't feel like a dead end. It felt like an open road. He smiled to himself, then spoke with certainty.